Hey, everybody. With us once again is Mark Collinsworth, the CIO, the Chief Investment Officer of Vera Global Wealth Management. And he's here to talk about a very specific situation. Today, Moody's, one of the big firms that gives credit ratings in the U.S., has said that it is going into a negative outlook on the future of U.S. debt, and it may actually downgrade it in the future. Now, why are they doing that? And what does it mean?
Well, thank you, Larry. What it really means is that the United States won't be technically its debt won't be as safe as other debt issued. And what Moody cited is that one, the United States has a fiscal policy, meaning that they just cannot stop spending money. So that was one negative against them. The other negative is we are now paying $1 trillion a year on our debt. So the $33 trillion, we pay $1 trillion in interest, and the crazy part about this is we don't have $1 trillion to pay on the debt. So we go issue another $1 trillion worth of treasury bonds or another $1 trillion worth of debt to pay the interest. So we're borrowing money to pay the interest payments.
And can't that continue perpetually?
It can only stop up to it can only work up to the point to where people no longer want to buy US bonds.
But if we keep issuing debt and the treasury yields remain high, which makes them attractive to buy, what would stop this whole scheme, if you want to put it that way? It works.
It's a scheme until it no longer works.
But
And the answer that
why wouldn't it no longer work?
well, I've got the perfect answer for you. All oil in the world has to be traded in US dollars. So if you want to buy oil, you have to trade it in US dollars. So what happens with all these governments that want to buy oil? They go out and buy US Treasury bonds, which are based in US dollars. The interest payments on that US debt is paid in US dollars. So that's the way we basically finance our debt, is because you have to buy oil. You want to buy oil, you have to buy US dollars/US debt.
Again, so what's the problem?
Because a lot of countries are getting tired of trading oil in US dollars. There's already talk about starting a global exchange to trade it in yuan, rubles, and euros. If there's a competing currency to buy oil in, why do you need to buy dollars or buy US dollar bonds if you can buy euro bonds or Russian bonds or Chinese bonds?
Well, what's the attraction to buy other than U.S. bonds? I mean, why would they go away from the U.S. Treasury since the yields are high and it's been working?
Well, if you don't buy US bonds and you don't have that US dollar, you can't buy oil.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, why would they? You say they're getting tired of it. Why are they getting tired of it?
They're getting tired of the United States telling them how to run their countries.
Actually, it's kind of like a realignment of political blocks, of alliances, and all that. It's actually
Great. It's really,
leverage, right?
especially with the Middle East. The Middle East is getting very, very fed up. The Middle East supplies roughly 35% of the global oil supply, and they're getting very upset that the United States comes and puts its nose in, like, Israel, perfect example. Well, what's the best way to get back at the United States? Take the US dollar off the reserve status, and that puts a hurt on it.
So what's going on both in Israel and also Ukraine is having these other countries possibly drift away from the U.S. dollar.
Correct. That's why Russia, because of the Ukraine thing, Russia's pushing it hot and heavy to have another currency that you can actually trade oil in.
Yeah. So getting back to the credit ratings, now Moody is the only of the three major credit ratings that has kept consistently rating us triple A. And that goes back to, I think, 1917.
Mhm.
Poor's and Fitch are the other two major credit ratings, and they've already downgraded the U.S. credit rating. So Moody's is the only one that's been consistent and sustaining us as triple A. So if they downgrade it, that's going to accelerate this process that we're talking about of the U.S. losing its dollar power.
Correct. Every downgrade will make it more difficult for people to want to buy bonds. And the only thing that will give them reason to buy bonds is they want to buy oil.
Well, the White House is blaming this on the GOP division and what they're doing. They've kicked out their speaker, so it's the turmoil in the GOP that's causing this problem. Do you buy that?
Absolutely not. Has nothing to do with that whatsoever. Then when Obama was president and he lost his when Fitch downgraded, took away the A and made us double A under Obama, whose fault was it then?
Yeah, the White
Joe
House.
Biden had they we've already had a downgrade under Joe Biden. They always it's politics. No politician's ever gonna take blame for his own mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, the White House is saying that it's the extremism and dysfunction of the GOP that's causing all of it.
Well, no, the problem is Democrats like to spend money, spend money, spend money, and that's one of the problems Moody's has. You can't spend money. The U.S. government brings in roughly $3.5 trillion a year in tax revenue, and we spend almost 30% of that just on our interest payments.
And you're saying long term, that's just not sustainable.
You can't do. I mean, if everyone listening to this probably has a credit card, what happens when you make $20,000 a year, but you spend $40,000 on your credit card? What eventually happens?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a point where you just can't sustain it anymore. You
Yeah.
pay it, yeah. So you're saying that long term, I mean, the immediate effect could be treasury yields will rise, but that can't be sustained in order to keep people attracted to treasuries. But at the same time, mortgage rates and interest rates on all sorts of things, credit cards, anything you buy, that will also rise. And that's going to have an impact, a negative impact on the U.S. economy.
Correct. Long term, yes.
All right. So, Mark, how far down the road are we going to go and how soon? And how's it going to end up?
Well, funny, when I was doing my math on this about a year ago, I was forecasting the United States government to be at $1 trillion in interest by 2030, roughly. And here we are at $1 trillion in interest 7 years early. So I can't even think what kind of interest payments will be at in another 7 years. I have seen some forecast out there. I've seen forecasts saying that the U.S. government will have $50 trillion in debt by 2030. If we have $50 trillion in debt, we're now talking about interest payments close to a little bit over $2 trillion a year in interest payments.
And what does that do to the economy?
You got to print more dollars, and that's inflationary.
So it just keeps going on and getting
Yeah.
worse. Yeah.
Yep.
And also now, in terms of, we hear a lot about the dollar losing its reserve status. How is that related to all this?
Well, if the dollar loses its reserve status, there's no reason to buy U.S. bonds.
And why is that?
Well, right now you have countries that have to buy U.S. debt whether they want to or not because they have to buy oil. So if those countries stop needing to buy, I would think about this. We have to issue roughly $3 trillion a year in new debt to finance the deficit, right? What happens when no one wants to buy that $3 trillion?
Yeah. So the reserve status is not necessarily permanent.
It is not, and that's the only reason why people buy our bonds is because of the reserve status.
And that's the petrodollar. At least that used to be.
That's correct. That's what they call a petrodollar.
And that was the deal we made in order to get the Arab oil. Yeah.
Yeah, they make us the reserve currency, and we basically protect them.
Yeah. So it looks like the political world is changing.
It is. We're just the United States just puts its nose in too many different countries' business, and they just don't want us there.
So before we wrap this up, what's your prediction? How bad is it going to get? How soon? And how are we going to end up?
If the U.S. dollar gets taken off the reserve status, I would say at some point down the road, several years down the road after we lose reserve status, it wouldn't surprise me if you actually saw the U.S. government, and of course, this is probably 20 years down the road, you'd probably see the U.S. government actually default on its debt.
And then what?
Have you watched those zombie apocalypse on TV?
Yeah.
Well, imagine that minus the zombies.
So it could get that bad, huh?
Yeah, I'm being dead serious on that. If the U.S. government defaults on this debt and goes into an official bankruptcy, it will be exactly like that.
All right,
Minus the zombies. Minus the zombies. Key there. Minus the zombies.
minus the zombies, but everything else would be
Yeah.
gone to heck. Yeah. All right, Mark, your famous last words. Once again, it's going to be glum, but I guess increasingly realistic.
Yeah. It's always the darkest before things go to hell in a handbasket.
Thanks a lot, I guess. Mark Collinsworth, CIO of Very Global Wealth Management. Thanks, I think, once again for being
You're
with us.
very welcome.